Hello, and welcome back to the Former Review. Today, we'll be having a very special episode where we'll be looking at 3 different films. Now sit back, grab your drinks, and let's talk about these movies.
What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the Former Review. This is Season 3, Episode 49, and thank you all for tuning in once again. So welcome to the 3rd episode in the award season series, as we're now in award season, and there are a lot of movies to be seen. So this is your first time tuning in. Every year, I watch the films that have been nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, and all the acting categories. I also sometimes make time to watch the screenplay movies, or if there's only 1 or 2 that I haven't seen that are included in the other ones. Now, these films haven't been nominated yet, but there's a good indication of which films are most likely going to be nominated for these awards at this time. So because this list is big and I only usually have a month to put out these movies, I decided to increase the amount of films I would be covering each episode for the time being to 3. So I've already covered Mank, One Night in Hollywood, and Promising Young Woman in the first episode, then The Trial of the Chicago 7, Pieces of a Woman, and Ammonite in the second one. So in this one, I will be covering Sound of Metal, News of the World, and Nomadland. And then, of course, a small update to my collection, so stay tuned. Have you ever thought about starting your own podcast? When I was trying to get this podcast off the ground, I had a lot of questions, like how do I record an episode? How do I get my show into all the apps that people like to listen on? How do I make money from my podcast? The answer to every single one of those questions is really simple. Anchor. Anchor is a one-stop shop for recording, hosting, and distributing my podcast. And best of all, it's absolutely 100% free and ridiculously easy to use. And now Anchor can match you with some great sponsors. That means you can get paid to podcast right away. In fact, that's exactly what I'm doing right now. So if you've always wanted to start a podcast and make money doing it, go to anchor.fm/start to join me and the diverse community of podcasters already using Anchor. Again, that's anchor.fm/start. And I can't wait to hear your podcast. So the only update to my movie collection that I was able to get the Daniel Craig Bond movies all on 4K for about $2 a movie. What's really cool about that is that Quantum of Solace, Skyfall, and Spectre are all true 4K, and only Casino Royale is fake 4K. Though it's slightly unfortunate that my favorite one is fake, but whatever. I'm excited to watch these again, especially in this medium, when they hopefully release the new movie later this year. Right now, my ranking from worst to best is Quantum of Solace, Spectre, Skyfall, and then Casino Royale. Frankly though, Skyfall is a better made film, especially from the cinematography point of view, but I personally really like Casino Royale just a tad bit more, mostly because of the poker aspect. When that movie first came out, I was at the peak of learning how to play poker, especially Texas Hold'em. And funny story, one long weekend when I went to the beach with my parents, I actually spent the entire day watching the World Series of Poker tournament. And don't judge me, but I learned a lot of how to play, and then also my knowledge has paid me back significantly since. In fact, my fiance's engagement ring was purchased with winnings that I won playing poker. So anyway, that's all I'm going to talk about that and my collection updates. So prior to going into these movies, I do want to preface them with a slight spoiler warning. I will talk about some spoilers here. As I always say, I do suggest that you go watch the film before you hear what I have to say about it. I am going to do my best not to ruin the movie for you, but if you don't care about that, keep listening. Also, I know I say this at the end, but the data shows that really no one listens to that part, so I want to reiterate it here at the front. And I want to instill the importance of writing reviews of what y'all think of the podcast. As I continue on, I always look for feedback from my listeners, and frankly, it's because I really do this for you all, and I want this to be entertaining. So you can always go on to your favorite podcast subscription and write a review, because I do check these out, and I do want to know how you think I can improve. What do you want to hear? Do you want to hear more guests? What do you want to hear? Definitely let me know, because I want to grow and I want to get better. It's always about improving. So let me know, and you can hit me up on social media for that. Anyway, now on to the movies at hand. If you don't care about one of them, feel free to skip ahead to about the 5-minute mark for Sound of Metal, the 13.5-minute mark for News of the World, and about the 19.5-minute mark for Nomadland. Oh, and there'll be a special announcement at the end, so stay all the way through to hear it. Now, sit back, relax, grab your drinks. Now let's talk about these movies. So Sound of Metal is a drama film directed and co-written by Darius Marder and starring Riz Ahmed, Olivia Cook, Paul Raci, Lauren Ridloff, and Matthew Amalric. It tells the story of a drummer who is beginning to lose his hearing. Ruben, played by Ahmed, is in a band with his partner Lou, who's played by Cook. One morning, he noticed that his hearing is deteriorating and his world starts crumbling around him. As they are both recovering addicts, Lou becomes worried that Ruben will relapse because of this new diagnosis. He then wants to get cochlear implants in an attempt to revive his hearing. However, as with most medical treatments, they are very expensive and he can't afford them. So after a few mental breakdowns, they visit a communal facility run by Joe, played by Razzie. Before allowing Ruben to join, he tells them that this place is not about curing deaf people, but giving them a way to live with their hearing symptoms. Lou ends up convincing Ruben to stay, and then she moves back in with her father in Paris. Ruben struggles at first because he doesn't really want to be there. He wants to leave and he wants to get these cochlear implants eventually and doesn't really see the benefit of him being there. However, as with a lot of movies like this, he does eventually find the meaning with being there while working with the children. As such, he then learns American Sign Language and then starts opening up to people in the community. He ends up drawing tattoos for them and also teaching them how to play the drums. However, he still has this underlying desire to get back to his old life, and he really does think that the cochlear implants will cure his hearing. One day, he finds a video of Lou on the internet and it reignites this desire to return to end the life that he had before. He secretly finds an audiologist and then sells his RV and all of his music gear to raise money for the surgery. Now, after the implant surgery, he returns to the deaf community, but Joe is disappointed. He then compares Ruben to an addict, which obviously Ruben doesn't want to hear. He believes that he is getting cured and that he's getting back to normality. But Joe then tells him again that the community is not for those who think death as being a handicap. Ruben then leaves and then starts living in a motel. And after recovering from surgery, he unfortunately realizes that these implants do not do what he wanted and his dreams are just shattered again. He does have some improved hearing capacity, but it's nowhere near what he wanted. He thought it was going to be essentially back to 100%, which isn't the case. And eventually, he does find his way to Lou in Paris, and here he even sees that she is very different from what he knew her as, and honestly, he realizes that so is he. He spent all of this time wanting to go back instead of going forward, whereas Lou obviously has moved forward. She still loves him and still has feelings for him, but they are very different. And in the end, he ends up accepting the difference and finally is able to move forward. As he leaves her home, he becomes overwhelmed, his emotions, but then also the noises of Paris. He then takes off his receptors and he gets to be in a stillness that Joe had mentioned to him earlier on in the movie. And what happens here is that Ruben is finally able to move forward. The audience doesn't really know what will happen to him, but he has finally given up on his past. And as such, he is no longer an addict. Yes, there's obviously potential for him to relapse under the other addictions that he has, but I mean, most viewers will look at his outcome as being optimistic. At the end of it all, Ruben comes to terms with the fact that as much as he tried, the life that he once had, he'll never have again. And just as his hearing will never be the same, and how him and Lou will never be the same. And he starts to take in Joe's advice to sit and take things in. He also realizes here that life goes on. It may be different from what he was doing in the past, and it's different from what he had planned out for his life. But in this moment, he finds calmness and peace as he begins his next chapter. As viewers, we don't know what happens to him, like I said, but neither does he. So that's where this authentic feeling that this movie has. We end up essentially living in the same world that Ruben is, and that's done through a lot of details. Because one, we start off looking at this character and then we see his journey, but because of how the details of this movie, especially in the sound design, is performed, we are basically Ruben. And at the beginning of the film, we have this loud guitar feedback, so we know that he had good hearing. And then this progressively gets worse and the audience feels what Ruben is feeling, which is, again, it places the audience right in this world with him, which allows audience members to attach themselves to him and really can make the audience feel that he should get the treatment, because honestly, a lot of people don't know about what cochlear implants can do, or anybody in this deaf community. In fact, I don't know a lot about it. I know what I've read and I've heard. I'm not deaf, so I don't know everything, but I know some things. But I can only imagine that there's people out there that don't know anything. And I think that for those who don't know what deafness feels like, this movie does a really good job at showing how that that is, because we hear certain things in certain ways, and those things sound different as the movie continues on. This was a phenomenal choice by the director, and the acting here is pretty fantastic, especially by Ahmed. He brings the emotion in really every scene and really just brings the audience with him on this journey of grief, denial, anger, depression, and then eventually acceptance. And Razi, who's a lot of the character background that he had was similar to his true story. He did serve 2 tours in Vietnam as a medic, and he does a pretty good job. Even though she's not in the film very much, Cook is very good as well. She provides a lot of emotion, which is really interesting because the only other film that I remember seeing her in is Ready Player One, and this is vastly different, and her acting here was really impressive. But while this film does succeed with its story and its characters, the message here is a little vague. So from my research, a cochlear implant essentially recreates hearing by bypassing the normal process through vibrations in the eardrum to the cochlea, which then stimulates nerves to the brain. A cochlear implant directly stimulates the cochlear nerves. Now, from what I've read, an audiologist would not have recommended this implant for Ruben given where his hearing was. Now, I didn't know about this, but apparently there's this disregard for hearing devices from the deaf community, like Razi's character was saying. Now, I'm guessing it's not as serious as they're willing to cast out people. However, could be that bad. I don't actually know. But from what I've read, there is an open-mindedness to this because, in fact, the National Association of the Deaf has a section on its website devoted to its position on implants as they, quote, welcomes all individuals regardless of race, religion, ethnic background, socioeconomic status, cultural orientation, mode of communication, preferred language use, hearing status, educational background, and use of technologies, end quote. However, they also note that, quote, cochlear implants are not appropriate for all deaf and hard of hearing children and adults, end quote. So I find that the issue with this ambiguity of the ending and if Ruben will keep the implants or not. Based on his final expression, it seems like he's finally found peace with the silence. And there have been some people in real life who want to get the implant that I've read who now have become sad and nervous about the results of getting the implant. And from what I've read, they are apparently really worried that they'll be ashamed for getting these. So then the question becomes, what is the point of this story? Acceptance of who he was or acceptance that he isn't going to be cured? Or is it just to enjoy the silence and appreciate the small things in life? It can go either way, and I think that ambiguity of which way it's trying to go is a slight weakness on what the overall message of the movie. It's a little unclear, and from what I've read about implants, it can be like Ruben after surgery, but it can also become almost normal. And it apparently does depend on person to person, which is why this ambiguity doesn't really work. However, I will say I'm not the best person to comment on that as someone who doesn't have any hearing loss. I think that my personal takeaway from this film is that it's tried to have some quiet time to enjoy life and simply exist. And that's just me. It may be different for everyone who watches this, but I think that ambiguity does have some issue. But in summary, the biggest draw to this movie is the sound work, the acting by Ahmed, and also the supporting cast of Cook and Razi. And I think that this film does show an underrepresented community in a thought-provoking light while also commenting on life and love. And I think that's worth watching again. Now we're going to stay in Texas, but we're going to go back a few years to right after the Civil War with News of the World. News of the World is a Western drama film co-written and directed by Paul Greengrass. It's based on the 2016 novel of the same name by Paulette Giles and stars Tom Hanks and has Helena Zengel in her first film. It follows a Civil War veteran, played by Hanks, who must return a young girl, played by Zengel, who was taken in by Native Americans as an infant to her last remaining family. So this film is set in the Texas backcountry about 5 years after the Civil War. Captain Kidd, played by Hanks, is working as a newsreader who travels from town to town and gives public readings of national newspapers. Then he finds Joanna as he's about to leave one town and he sees a man hung, and he finds out that she has been with a Native American tribe who she's been living there for about 10 years. He's then charged to return her to her family, who is outside San Antonio, who's several hundred miles away. And even though he thinks that he's too old for such this journey, he agrees to do it. So Joanna speaks no English and has very little memory of her life before living with the tribe. She might look like her German relatives, but she believes she's part of the Native American tribe. She dresses like one, acts like one, and even fights like one. And essentially, Kid must find a way to integrate this young girl who has been living with them back into Western culture, while also keeping her safe from dangers in the West, such as outlaws and also Western society standards. And this film does deal with ideas and questions of identity, racism, and the importance of having culture. Tom Hanks here, as always, is good, especially with the performances depicting the lives of men burdened with very emotional challenges. He can be storming Omaha Beach in Saving Private Ryan, or he can be staring down Somali pirates in Captain Phillips, and he will be good at displaying emotions. He's had a pretty long career, and my top Tom Hanks roles, not exactly his best movies per se, but it's definitely his best performances, are Philadelphia, Sully, and Saving Private Ryan. Anyway, so at the beginning of the movie, he is a character who is seemingly happy, but you can tell that something is missing from his life. As the film continues on, it's shown that he feels robbed of the life he actually wanted, the one that he had hoped for and worked toward. The Civil War, unfortunately, took his printing business and also his wife from him. And from what I read about the novel, because I haven't read it, it is made more clear in that medium that this job is basically all that he could get based on his experience. Now, the film gives him a little bit more passion, and you see Kid knowing the effect of telling stories. And he speaks over the course of the movie about mysterious occurrences, wondrous inventions, political things that are going on, and he dramatizes a lot of it while also telling the truth. And this grows over the course of the movie, and this is all really due to his interactions with Joanna. Initially, he has trouble expressing his emotions, and he just kind of reads things out pretty matter-of-factly. But he starts growing to care for Joanna and becomes more invested in her well-being. And he starts taking pleasures in everyday life and also thinking about his future as well. He eventually chooses in the end to adopt Joanna rather than leaving her with her relatives, who you see are pretty cold-hearted and somewhat abusive. So by doing this, he not only basically expresses the best aspects of his own nature, and he is now able to live out the rest of his life with a feeling of fulfillment and love that he didn't have prior to meeting Joanna. And Greengrass has done characters like this before. Kid is a defeated and reluctant soldier with bad memories, like Jason Bourne, and Joanna is a misunderstood as she's from two different families, similar to Abduali Muse from Captain Phillips. Though where the film really shines is how Greengrass shows the big state of Texas. He has done similar effects with Northern Ireland and Baghdad, but to my memory, this was the first time that he seemingly treated the landscape as a character. During the time that this movie takes place, there's a lot of rugged spaces and crowded towns with not too many people living out there, and they're still divided because of the Civil War. And Greengrass here shows you all of that. He shows the interaction with characters in these towns, but then when Kid and Joanna journey out outside of that, you see how vast the West is. And Greengrass doesn't use the shaky cam aesthetic that he has used in prior films, and really makes this one look absolutely gorgeous to look at. Audiences really can lose themselves in a Western world that is accompanied by a very decent James Newton Howard score, and it feels exactly like a Western should feel, slow and progressive. And this is slightly odd coming from Greengrass, as he usually focuses on the fast-paced and also high-tech film genre. And it's not odd in a bad way. I guess surprising is a better way to put it. And frankly, this movie really seems like an epic, yet it still deals with some modern themes and messages. So this film really does succeed with its story, characters, details, messages, and then the ending. Now, I will say, though developed well, I did find myself not caring about these two characters, and this is maybe because they didn't speak to me in any way. I think I will have to rewatch this film at some point to try again and see if there's more to grasp toward them. However, that may not happen anytime soon. I'm not against rewatching it, but I'm not putting it at the top of my priority list. It really does look beautiful though, and the acting is great. The story only didn't speak to me as much as I thought it would have, because I do really like Westerns. Though I would recommend the film to you if you are a Tom Hanks fan, or honestly if you do enjoy Westerns. This one just didn't work for me 100% of the time, but it's definitely worth it for the cinematography alone, and then you add in the act. Now let's move on to the last Western that I'm going to talk about today, but it's a little bit more modern, Nomadland. Nomadland is an independent contemporary Western drama film directed, written, edited, and co-produced by Chloe Zhao. It is based on the 2017 nonfiction book Nomadland, Surviving America in the 21st Century by Jessica Bruder. And the movie stars Frances McDormand as a woman who leaves her small town to go around the American West. It also features David Strathairn as well as some real-life nomads, Linda May, Swanky, Bob Wells, and Peter Spears as fictionalized versions of themselves. So the book and the film explore this phenomenon of older American workers traveling across the country in search of employment because they were adversely affected by the Great Recession. And for when Bruder was writing the book, she ended up living in a camper for 3 years and drove more than 15,000 miles from coast to coast and also from Mexico to Canada. And through this journey, she was able to interact with many people, though mostly women, between the ages of 55 and 75. And McDormand plays Fern, the main character. So prior to the events of the film, Fern worked for this company that closed down after the demand for sheetrock had decreased. And she has no loved ones at this point, and her husband died years ago. She's basically living by herself. She does work hard to keep her days filled with something to do, but unfortunately, because of her history, she doesn't really have any skills that can get her any high-paying jobs. As such, she has to travel to find work and lives in her van. Zhao and her cinematographer, Joshua James Richards, really put the audience in this culture in the American West, and it's one that I certainly didn't know about until I saw this movie. They really make sure that anyone watching this movie feels for these people who are in this life by choice or otherwise. The audience feels the cold when Fern sleeps in her van in the middle of the winter, and the audience will probably groan when somebody makes Fern's life more difficult than it already is. However, despite all this, Fern and the audience really gain this appreciation for the small things in life, as well as finding happiness whenever you can. And this film directly ties into the old proverb, home is where the heart is, as Fern tells her friend's daughter, "I'm not homeless, I'm only houseless." As viewers, the audience is along for the journey of traveling place to place, yet throughout the entire movie, you still feel that same hominess and calm attitude that Fern has. And this is really elevated due to McDormand's acting ability. While not her best role, she's able to portray someone who represents the people of America who work hard but do not get credit for it. She looks like somebody who has a lot on her mind, but that doesn't stop her. She stops to laugh when she needs to, and each time she's emoting a feeling, the audience can feel each of them. She's able to take Zhao's script and create a very moving performance, but in the end, the story's not even really about her. It's about this community that Fern is a part of. As the audience learns more about this community, it really can give them a further appreciation for life outside their own. And it gives this message to the audience without really feeling preachy or forced. So this movie really does succeed with its story, characters, message, details, and the ending. Is this my type of movie? No, not really. It's not my favorite Western, but it honestly is a modern one. Gone are the horses and carriages and gunfights between white and black hats. And here are the people looking for honest jobs, traveling from place to place. Would I rewatch it again? No, probably not. But I do appreciate the art that Zhao and McDormand did with this story and character. Now here's the special announcement. Guess what, everyone? This is episode 99 of the Formal Review, which means the next one is my 100th. And it's really wild to me that I've done about 100 of these. So for the occasion, I'm going to be doing an Ask Me Anything About Movie session that y'all can participate in. You can ask what are my favorite movies or favorite actors are. Anything really you want to know, reach out and ask me. I'll be putting out polls and whatnot to remind you, but feel free just to reach out and ask your question. I'm also going to be interviewed by a special guest that will be making their first and potentially only appearance on the show. I also will have a big and special announcement that I will make on that episode that you'll have to tune in to hear. And thanks to everyone in advance for participating, and I look forward to your questions. Now, what did you think of these 3 movies? Let me know. Hit me up on social media. Formal Review is on Facebook, Twitter, and the Gram. I post many things, including trailer reactions, so go check those out. The handle is all the same. It's at the Formal Review. Feel free to also check out backseatdirectors.com, where I work with a big team to put out movie reviews and also editorials. Again, that's backseatdirectors.com. Please also subscribe to the Formal Review. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're now on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio. Honestly, pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast podcast, we have our content there. Also, I'm always wanting to grow and improve, so please leave a review and what you want to hear, because I really do this for you all. I see the numbers, and I really appreciate everyone supporting me and talking to me about movies, because frankly, that's what it's all about. And for anyone who has supported me on a financial basis, thank you again. And if you want to help support on a financial basis, please go to anchor.fm/the-formal-review and click support this podcast. And honestly, any donation is appreciated. Thank you all again for tuning in. And until next time, wear your mask, wash your hands, stay safe, and take care, everyone.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Formal Review. Cheers, and we'll see you next time.